The Apple Watch Ultra 3 has a lot of sensors and a lot of algorithms to analyze that data. But are the measurements that end up in your Apple Health app reliable? Well, that's what we'll test in this video. I spent the last week doing in-depth scientific testing of the Apple Watch Ultra 3, and today we'll analyze and process those results. Now, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. So let's dive right in and let's start with the heart rate tracking performance. And as always, let's start with one of the easiest exercises for a device to track indoor cycling, with the reference device along the horizontal axis and the heart rate as measured by the Apple Watch Ultra 3 along the vertical axis. And if the two would perfectly agree, all points here should be along the blue line. And indeed, most points are along the blue line. This is actually a really good agreement between the reference and the Apple Watch Ultra 3. And the correlation, this R value up here, is rounded to 1.00, so a really good result. So that's actually almost the best possible result, since the correlation cannot be higher than 1. So a rounded value of 1.00 is really good. But let's now see if there's any dropout, so moments where it stops detecting your heart rate, because that's the one problem that still remains with some of the Apple Watches that I tested. I did a total of 3 spinning sessions with the Apple Watch Ultra 3. And in this plot right here, you see one of those spinning sessions with the Apple Watch Ultra 3 in red and the reference in blue-green. And there's almost a perfect overlap between the two. Only one small dip in heart rate right here wasn't detected, but otherwise basically perfect. And also this second example is close to perfect, with only some minor details being missed, like right here or right here. Otherwise, just a really good performance, and also compared to the competition, this is really good. And you can see that in this overview right here. So the better the agreement with the reference device, the more to the top right the device is, and the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is marked in red. So the best performing devices are on the top right here. Now it's hard to read, but you can already see that the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is among some of the best performers. And you can see that even better if we zoom in a bit. Now I should zoom in actually even more, because these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And the Apple Watch Ultra 3, even among some of these better performers, is basically the best performer out there, together with, in this case, the Apple Watch SE 2025 that I also recently tested, some Huawei devices, and also different other Apple Watches. Also, the Pixel watches are doing really well. So these are some of the best performers out there, and the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is just doing really well. So for indoor cycling, at least based on my testing, I can really recommend it. But what about running? That's a lot harder, because there's much more bumpiness and also a lot of outside light interference potentially. So let's see how it performed for that. And here we have a similar overview to before, but now for running, and it still looks really good. There were a few moments with minor deviation, especially in the lower heart rate range, but it seems to be somewhat limited, though the deviation is a bit more than what we saw for indoor cycling. This also means that the correlation is a tiny bit lower now at 0.99. Still very good, but maybe something is going on here. So let's take a look at the runs themselves. Here we have one of those runs with, again, the clock time along the horizontal axis and the heart rate along the vertical axis, where for most of the time the Apple Watch Ultra 3 agreed almost perfectly with the reference, with some minor deviations of just a few BPM. Only here in the beginning did it struggle a little bit. So there was a peak in heart rate that was likely not really there, and also a slight delay in picking up on an increase here. But after that, it quickly locked on and did really well. And for this other session, we basically see the same thing. A minor deviation right here in the beginning, also right here in the lower heart rate range. But when I was actually running, it picked up on all the intervals and just did really well. And we can again compare this to the competition, which is in this overview right here, where it's again among some of the best performers. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher, and it's not the absolute best now, so potentially some lighter Apple Watches are doing a little bit better, like the Apple Watch Series 11, the Apple Watch SE 2025, the Apple Watch Series 6, the Apple Watch Series 9. So the Ultras here appear to be a tiny bit lower than these lighter Apple Watches, so potentially weight here does play a minor role, where the lighter watches do move a little bit less on the wrist, potentially giving better performance. but this is still in a range where it's hard to say if this is noise or actual signal. Overall, good performance by the Apple Watch. However, let's now make things even more difficult and let's take a look at the results for cycling. But before doing that, if you're into running like me, but you don't know how to make the best running plans, or you want even better running plans than you already have and get live guidance during your runs, I would recommend the Runner app, which is my favorite app for getting personalized running plans and also getting that live coaching during your run where it's telling you to go faster, slower, which pace to go at. It's really brought a big improvement to my running and also prevented me from getting injuries by also toning me down a little bit when I tend to go too fast too soon. So whether you're training for a marathon, half marathon, 10k, 5k, or you just want to get faster or better at a certain distance, use my affiliate link up here or down here to get a 2-week free trial on the Runner app. I can really recommend it. But let's get back to the testing and let's take a look at the cycling results. And these results for cycling still look good, especially compared to the competition. There's a slightly bigger deviation compared to what we saw for indoor cycling, but honestly, most points are still on or close to the blue line. So I'm really happy with that. There were a few moments of deviation, and I'm really curious to see when we look at the individual sessions how many dropouts there were, because that sometimes happens for outdoor cycling. But the correlation at 0.99 is really not bad at all. But as I said, let's take a look at some of those individual bike rides. And most bike rides honestly look really good with some minor dropouts though. You can see here near the end there were some dropouts. So if there's a longer straight line, that likely means that for a while the Apple Watch didn't detect my heart rate. And also right here when I had this dip, there was a partial dropout. But given that this was on a really cold day where I didn't have a jacket on me and the vessels in my arm were likely pretty constricted, this is actually still a very good result. Now on this bike ride right here, we mostly see the same thing, but there's even more minor dropouts here in the beginning. Also here near the end some, otherwise still pretty decent agreement. This bike ride looks even a lot better, only a minor dropout potentially here in the middle, otherwise looking quite good. This bike ride is almost perfect, only some of the details are lost. Here we see some bigger issues, so there was some dropout in the beginning, so there were likely 2 wrongly detected heart rates, but the Apple Watch realized it didn't have a good signal, so it just stopped detecting my heart rate for a while. This one looks really good. Also here a really good result, only some details near the end are missed. However, compared to the competition, this still looks very good. And I can actually show you that again. So that's displayed in this overview right here, where the correlation of the Apple Watch Ultra 3 makes it the second best performer of all time. Now again, this is with some uncertainty, so we cannot say it's exactly the second best performer of all time. But for the measurements that it did take without dropouts, its correlation is just really good. It's one of the top performers. We can even zoom in a little bit. So that's here, this zoomed in view. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. So already some of the best devices. And amongst those is doing about as well as the Apple Watch Ultra 2, which makes sense as basically nothing has changed in terms of sensors for the heart rate tracking. So all my testing of the Apple Watch Ultra 2, both in 2025 and in 2024, gave basically the same result as for the Ultra 3. Only the AirPods Pro 3 are potentially doing better, though I still have to make an updated review for that. Overall, a really good result with a few dropouts potentially. But let's now get to the exercise that is generally hardest for Apple Watches, weightlifting. Here I expect quite some dropouts, but maybe I'll be positively surprised. And the results for weightlifting do look more or less as expected, where when the heart rate was measured, it actually still looks pretty good. So almost all points are still somewhat close to the blue line. There is a little bit more deviation now, and the correlation is also the lowest that we've seen so far for the Apple Watch at 0.98, but that's still a very good correlation. However, here we do just need to look at those individual sessions. So let's take a look at those. And here we have one short weightlifting session where I did bench press for the first half. And there you can see the Apple Watch Ultra 3 wasn't able to detect the peaks in my heart rate. So each time I started this set of exercises, my heart rate increased, and only after I released the bar was it able to detect my heart rate again. So here there are big dropouts, mainly during the peaks of my heart rate. When I was doing dips, it was a bit better again, but here you can really see you need to use another type of device for this. Either a chest strap or an in-ear device potentially. And even during this session right here, where I was doing back and biceps, You can see that during biceps curls in the beginning, it really struggled. Later on, when I was doing pull-ups, it was a bit better. But still, I don't think the Apple Watch Ultra 3, like almost any smartwatch out there, basically every smartwatch out there, it's just not able to measure your heart rate reliably during these type of weightlifting sessions. At least on me that's true, because there's so much tension on my arms and wrists that it just loses the signal. So for any exercise except for in the gym, I can recommend the Apple Watch Ultra 3 without using an external chest strap. Now, external chest straps in general are the most reliable way of measuring your heart rate, except for very specific circumstances. If that's very important to you, I'd recommend that. The heart rate tracking performance of the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is some of the best out there and is definitely one of the most recommended watches for that in my opinion. However, as you saw, there were still a few minor quirks. I wouldn't use it for weightlifting, for instance, and occasionally there were minor dropouts. Still, compared to the competition, it's some of the best performance out there. The only way to currently likely potentially improve it is by wearing the AirPods Pro 3 at the same time, which should take over heart rate tracking in the more tricky situations like when you're at the gym. However, I still need to test this combined performance and see how good that switching between the Apple Watch and the AirPods Pro 3 is. But what about other features like the sleep stage tracking? Is that any good? Or in other words, can the Apple Watch Ultra 3 detect when you're in deep sleep, light sleep or REM sleep? Well, let's find out. But before doing that, I would like to ask if there's some way you can support the channel. I'm running this channel next to my full-time job as a scientist and it's not cheap or easy. I spend a lot of time and money. For instance, I bought all these Apple Watches myself. So this month alone, I spent about 2,000 euros on Apple Watches. And additionally, I pay my editor Alex to edit these videos. Now, if you want to support, the most direct way of doing that is by becoming a YouTube member, which gives you early access to some of my videos. And this is basically Patreon on YouTube. So you give me direct financial support. Another good way of financially supporting the channel is by using some of my affiliate links in the description below, many of which give you the best discount possible. Or if you buy a bunch of stuff on Amazon, if you bookmark my Amazon affiliate link, it doesn't cost you any extra. You can usually do that by pressing Command or Control D after clicking that link. And if then in the future for any Amazon purchase, you first click that bookmarked link, I get a small financial contribution and it doesn't cost you any extra. And of course, subscribing and liking this video is also really appreciated. Anyway, of supporting would be great. But back to the results and let's get to the sleep stage tracking results. And here we have an overview of the sleep stage tracking results. Now this is still a relatively initial test. It's based on 6 nights total. So in a few months I'll do a more comprehensive test, but I do think the results are pretty clear. So on top we have the sleep stages as detected by the reference device. Now we'll use the Z-Max EEG headband as a reference, which can measure brain waves during the night and was specifically designed for sleep tracking. And on the left right here, we have the sleep stages as detected by the Apple Watch Ultra. And I normalized each column right here to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the reference was detected as each sleep stage by the Apple Watch Ultra 3. And if they would perfectly agree, all values in yellow right here should be 100%. Now, first of all, we see that deep sleep agreement was pretty decent at about 70%, and almost all confusion in this case was with light sleep. Light sleep agreement was very good at about 85%, and most confusion was actually with REM sleep in this case. And REM sleep agreement was by far the best out of any device I've seen at about 84-83%. So that's looking really good. Generally, most devices really struggle with REM sleep, and the fact that we have an 83% agreement with the reference device is actually very good. So overall, pretty solid sleep stage tracking. Now again, this is just for 6 nights and on me, so we can never be sure if all results translate to future testing and also to you, but I think the results are pretty consistent with what we expect. But we can actually check that by comparing these results to that of many other devices out there. But let me first show you 1 or 2 examples of what these nights actually look like. Now here we have one example night where on top we have the EEG device and on the bottom the Apple Watch Ultra 3, where for now I marked the deep sleep as detected by the reference device in purple in both of these graphs. And you can see that there's generally a pretty good agreement. I had 3 main deep sleep segments, and all of these were to some degree also detected by the Apple Watch Ultra 3. Now, I actually think this fragmentation right here in deep sleep is probably not as bad as it seems. So probably I was sort of on the edge of being on deep sleep or not, according to some of the parameters. And the EEG device actually detected a very fragmented deep sleep segment, where maybe manual scoring would actually have made this a more continuous segment, similar to how the Apple Watch Ultra 3 detected it. But overall, there's actually a pretty decent agreement, and we see something similar for REM sleep. So if we now mark the REM sleep as detected by the EEG device in red, we see that all main 4 segments were also detected by the Apple Watch Ultra 3. Only some extra REM sleep was detected right here in the beginning. And this is sort of typical for what I know of my specific sleep stage patterns. So I tend to have a very short REM sleep segment in my first sleep cycle, or nothing at all as detected by most references. And the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is expecting one here, so it did put one here. Likely I did either have a super short one that wasn't detected by the EEG device, or I didn't have one at all, but that's just my particular sleep phenotype. And probably the Apple has some prior of expecting some REM sleep at the end of my first sleep cycle. Overall though, still a very good agreement, but let's put these results into the context of many other devices. And this overview shows you the performance of many devices I've tested in the past, with the average agreement over the 3 individual sleep stages along the horizontal axis, and the agreement of the worst out of those 3 sleep stages along the vertical axis, with all devices compared to the ZMax EEG headband, so the one we used in this video, in green, and we have the Apple Watch Ultra 3 in green right here. So it's among some of the best performers, and basically doing identical to the Apple Watch Ultra 2 and many other Apple Watches I've tested in the past. So all of them are doing quite well. And I would say that at the moment there are 5 brands that are the top performers in terms of sleep stage tracking. So we have the Apple Watch. There's also the Pixel Watch with the new algorithm, which is doing really well. If you haven't seen that video, there's been a recent update and you can find that up here. Now there's also the Sleep 2 or Nucoa app, which is doing really well. The Oura Ring, which is number 4. And the last one, which is my favorite sleep improvement device, is the 8 Sleep Pod. So I use the 8 Sleep Pod 5 Ultra, and this is not a wearable, but something that goes around your mattress that can actively heat and cool each side of your bed independently. So for you and your partner, you can set a different temperature. And in both winter and summer, this is just amazing. In summer, I set it to cool me down quite a lot. And even in winter, I generally sleep a lot cooler than my partners. But I do like my bed to be warm when I get into it, so I can set that temperature just perfect for me, and this has been the biggest improvement to my sleep quality out of all the devices that I own. Now, it's not cheap, so if you want to get the best discount possible, you can use my affiliate link up here or down here, and you'll be supporting the channel at the same time. But those are the top 5 brands I recommend. The Whoop strap is also doing quite well, but it's more second tier. And most other brands just aren't that good at sleep stage tracking. But the Apple Watch generally has a very solid sleep stage tracking algorithm, at least in how it performs on me. So again, top-notch performance of the Apple Watch Ultra 3, at least compared to the competition. It's still not perfect, but about as good as it gets. Next, let's take a look at the GPS tracking performance. In my initial test, I already did a running GPS test, but let's now add a cycling GPS test and do a second running test as well. And let's start with the performance during outside cycling, which I tested by cycling the same route several times. And then we want to see if the GPS tracks overlap very well, which increases the likelihood of good GPS tracking performance. But if there's a big deviation between the tracks, then it's much more likely that the GPS tracking performance isn't very good. Now, normally I also show you the moment the GPS signal is acquired. However, I started them from my home this time and I don't want to show you where it is, but I can tell you the GPS signal was almost instantly acquired, which is good. But let's now check the consistency between the routes. Now, the first thing you will notice is that there's some smoothing going on. This we know from Apple Watches. They don't just give you the raw GPS signal, they try to make it look a little bit better, get rid of some of that noise. But that also means that some of the corners are a bit rounded, like you can see right here. And if we then look at the consistency between the routes, this actually looks really good. Now, I started with 5 signals, but only 3 signals go until the very end, as you will see in a second. So here there's still decent consistency, but already a little bit of deviation. But then from here on out, it actually looks really consistent. But we have those rounded corners, so that's something to take into account. Here still pretty consistent. And here I actually started taking 2 different routes. So let's only follow this signal right here. It's really consistent, really quite good. A little bit of deviation right here, but overall, compared to the competition, this is some of the better performance out there, but it does include smoothing, so that's something to take into account. This will make it look artificially a bit better in some ways. You can also see that, for instance, around this corner right here. For all of them, there's sort of this rounded corner, and then it pushes me back a little bit. So I suspect it was smoothing up until here, and then I had to wait in front of the traffic light, and it slowly then pushed me towards my correct position. And then afterwards, they're super consistent again, so looking really good, a little bit of deviation, but nothing major to complain about. Here I actually had to go to the pharmacy, so that's a real signal. And then overall, I would say a pretty consistent signal. So if you're okay with some smoothing, it's actually a really good performer. But let's next take a look at a run that I did. So in my initial review, I already showed you one run, and let's now take a look at a second one. And those results are right here. So for my run, I always run the same circle in Park Belvedere. And the interesting thing is that on this side, there's a big wall, which often interferes with many GPS signals, where on this side, it should be a bit easier to track my GPS signal. And generally for the Apple Watch Ultra, we have a very consistent signal. So looking really good on this side, really good consistency, but again, a bit of smoothing. And then also right here on this side is looking really good. And here is where many devices struggle. I would say there's about the same amount of deviation on this side as on this side. So really quite good. So as long as you're okay with that post-processing or that smoothing of the signal, then the GPS tracking of the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is really good. The philosophy is different than, for instance, Garmin has, where Garmin tries to give you more raw data, which also has its upside, so you won't get these rounded corners. So Garmin is one of the best GPS trackers out there. The Apple Watch Ultra 3 is now also doing really well. It's just a different philosophy behind the signal that they're giving you. I don't know, what do you think? Is this a problem for you, this kind of smoothing or processing of the signal? Or is this actually something you prefer? Because you do get more nice and smooth tracks, which will remove some of the noise in the signal. In my opinion, that's pretty decent GPS tracking performance. It's really consistent if we do the same route several times. So there's definitely some smoothing and post-processing going on. So I'm actually not sure if the live speed or pace you see when looking at your watch is the exact same as the speed or pace you get after the activity is processed. This is actually something I still want to investigate further in the future. Overall though, the Apple Watch Ultra 3 is one of the best sports and health trackers out there, at least when it comes to the raw data. Now, given that Apple also recently launched their sleep score, the data are becoming more and more interpretable. However, in terms of recovery metrics, devices like the Whoop strap or the Oura Ring are still doing slightly better in my opinion. So if that is your focus, you might want to look also at one of these devices. Now, if you do end up getting an Apple Watch Ultra 3, maybe a Pixel Watch, an Oura Ring, a Whoop strap, an 8 Sleep Pod, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to get the best discount possible and at the same time support the channel, there's different affiliate links in the description below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Apple Watch Ultra 3, I think you will like this video on Apple's new sleep score or this video on the Whoop strap.